time is your most valuable asset, and it's something that you're never going to get back. And so really evaluating what that looks like for you and is so important. To your point, getting back time with friends, family, or just your business. And find an executive assistant that can truly not only benefit you, but benefit your business, and make sure that it's the right fit with culturally as well as personality. I think fits are always key.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I am joined today by the founder of Hamilton Raye, your outsourced admin, which brings professional remote administrative support to agencies all over the world. So with that, thank you for joining us today, Amanda Hamilton.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because we're talking about something that has been transformative for me, and I think could be transformative for a lot of the folks that are listening who may today believe that hiring assistants to help take administrative tasks off their plate is out of reach for them. And so I'm really excited for today's chat. But before we get into all of that, Amanda, I'd like to give you a chance to, in your own words, share what you do and who you serve.
Yeah. So how I quickly like to describe it is a fractional executive assistant solution for businesses. Allowing people to have, like, our vision is to allow every size business to have access to a professional executive assistant. And so that's truly what we do and our bread and butter.
I love it. And so it's funny because I just this week had a friend in one of these mastermind groups that I'm in post and say, hey, like, I'm thinking about hiring an assistant and I'm just not sure, and this is a question that gets posted in that group all the time, but he had this belief that, like, should I wait until, we're at $1 million, $2 million in revenue? And I was like, that's way too late. Like, I hired my first assistant when we were barely doing 10K a month because I just started with 10, 15, 20 hours a week, but man, did it ever make a big difference. So before we get into all of that, I'm really curious, how did you get into this space in the first place? What led you to starting this company for this particular problem?
Yeah, I'll give a little backstory and kind of share how it then took me into a place. And it's so funny to talk about this story because it sometimes feels like a completely different life that I was living where I am today. So I worked in corporate retail for 10 years. And in 2018, end of 2018, I said, okay, I need a change. I was kind of getting into a burnout phase. I also think I had hit that, like, 7 to 10 year itch of, like, all right, I need something new. I had worked in the same organization, same team for 10 years out of college. And so I left my job which
I laugh because I get that itch at like 3 years.
I was going to say 10 years is like unknown anymore,
Yeah.
But there's definitely loyalty, and not that people aren't loyal when you're jumping around, but I had a really hard time leaving. I almost think it might have been change. I'm not sure what it was, but I loved my team. I was just in a burnout phase and I was like, I need to get out. So I left my job. I moved from Columbus, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio, and I didn't have another job. And so I started to kind of play around with things. In order to pay my mortgage, I was working at the front desk of an Orange Theory. I was a Stitch Fix stylist, and all of these things were, part-time remote. And one of the jobs I started doing is I was a virtual assistant with this agency. And so when I was doing that, I loved this idea of remote work. It was so cool. It was so unknown to me of living and working from anywhere. And this digital nomad lifestyle was so intriguing. And so I was working there for a little bit. I loved it. I loved that concept of it. But the thing that I did not like so much was it felt very task heavy. And so it was a lot of, hey, do this, or hey, do that. And it wasn't allowing me to really be solution oriented, kind of being more of like a team player that I was used to in my corporate life. And so as I was doing that, it made me realize, hey, I think that there's something that I could do here differently. And so I started working with a couple of clients on my own. And I kept saying to my sister, why do I like this so much better? And she's like, well, think about it. And I'm like, I'm solution oriented. I'm like a part of their team. And so that's truly what sparked me starting this business of, all right, I can do this, but I can do it a lot differently and really provide more of that executive assistant support to businesses that, the president of Toyota has, and, managing their calendar, managing their inbox, all these different things, providing that level of service to any size business. And so that's really where I got started and kind of started building from there. And we've quickly expanded.
Very cool. And so that leads me to, I guess, my next question, which is what are some of the big misconceptions that you run up against when you talk to people about hiring an assistant? What are some of the beliefs that people have about this that you find hold them back from potentially accessing all of the upside that's available to them in starting to buy back time on some of these types of things that they're probably being held back doing today, spending a lot of extra hours doing?
Yeah, I think one thing is the cost can be a little scary to people, especially if you're just starting out or if you've never worked with somebody before. That is one thing. And I don't think that people immediately see the value until you start working with them. And then you're a month in and you're like, how did I survive without them before? So I think that that's one piece of it. I also think that, especially, if you're just starting a business, or if you've never had a team that you've led before, it can be a little scary to delegate. And so it's like that trust
Mm.
piece that if you don't know somebody super well initially, it's like building that trust and building that legwork and then saying, okay, yeah, I can give these things to somebody else. It doesn't have to be done by me. Because especially when you're first starting out, you think, well, nobody can do it as well as I can. And so I think that that's like a misconception of people. There's a lot of things that, anybody can take on. It's really about how can you focus on what you're best at and what your like zone of genius is, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, those are all the kind of same things that even having, like, I'm in networks where it's weird if you don't have an assistant. Like, I have a lot of friends that have assistants and had them long before I did. And so, even with that level of exposure, I still ran up against exactly those things. Like, I have to hire somebody full time and I can't afford it. How am I possibly going to give this person access to my email and my calendar? Like, that just seems like terribly risky. How is that ever going to happen? How is this person ever going to respond to my, my colleagues, my friends, my family, and like, use the right voice and the right tone and like all of these things? It just seemed outlandish to me. But the thing that allowed me to kind of keep pushing forward was all of this proof that it could be done because everybody around me was doing it. But even still, I had those same fears. So I can only imagine that folks that, to them, this isn't a normal thing, or maybe they haven't seen it a whole lot, it would seem far fetched. So with that in mind, when should agency owners specifically start to consider this as an option for them?
Yeah, I think honestly, if it's something that you can do right in the beginning, I think it's the best. Or just when you're busy enough that you're starting to feel a little bit stretched, not too stretched, because when you're too stretched, you can't then commit the necessary amount of time to train somebody and really build that rapport with them so that they can learn your voice, etc. But I think as early as possible, just because the more that you can shift off of your plate onto somebody else's workload. Also, I think there is a conception or a view of if you have an assistant, you typically look bigger, right? And so I think as you're building a business, if you have that, people might look at you differently as well. So I always say, like, start as early as you can, as early as you can afford it. It'll help you not only, find more time to focus on what you can do better, but there is a funny thing where, oh, wow, you have an assistant? They must be doing really well,
It's so funny you say that because to just get on my soapbox for a minute here, there was a period of time between assistants because I had one that transitioned out and we had to transition another one in. So there's this period of time where I didn't have one. And so I would just write emails as a fake assistant because I wanted to maintain the posture that it gave me when people were like requesting meters and stuff. Because you're totally right. It does give you this different level of authority. I do have a legitimate assistant now though. So anyone that's emailing me, like that's a thing. But it's one of the things that I think is particularly advantageous for agency owners specifically is generally, you know that you can go deploy your time for X amount of dollars per hour, right? So let's say your standard rate is $150, $200 per hour as a consultant. It's like the math is really simple. If you can buy an administrative assistant's hour for $20, then you just bought back, like for 1 hour that you work on client work, you can buy 10 hours of your time back. And I know for myself, it wasn't until I really understood that I was like, oh shit, yeah, that's a real opportunity. And then the next hurdle I had to get over was like not really understanding how much of my time was going to all the things that an assistant can take care of for me. So I guess that's the next thing is what are some of the typical things that assistants are taking care of? And then I will share my anecdote about like how I had to reframe or how I had to start tracking time to realize like how much of an impact on my life those things were having when I got to the point exactly where you described where I was getting really stretched. I was like terribly stretched. I waited too long, but I was still able to get through it.
So funny, I have to just go back about you writing emails as your assistant because you are not the first person that has told me that before, which I just think is absolutely incredible. So I applaud you for that. And then what I would say in terms of outsourcing, first and foremost, is I personally don't have an assistant at this point just because I love the work. So, and it really allows me to expand how to best like manage my team in that way. But how I look at outsourcing things, and this goes to an assistant, it goes to your point of whatever I can't do or I don't do well, or it's going to take me too much time, I'm going to give to somebody else. Like mowing my lawn, like yard work, like things that I could then be spending more time working on my business is really going to do that for me. And so I think that that kind of goes hand in hand with any part of your life. And an assistant being such a big piece of that, it's like, what can you do to get that work off your plate that's not going to serve you? So, and related to what most people hand off, I would say initially, first and foremost, we always take on calendar. Calendar is one of the easiest things to do. And it's funny because a lot of people see it as such a big task that nobody can understand. Well, I don't know how they could know what they can move. And the fun thing is we have a lot of really cool tools that we've built along the way that we can actually do it and we can learn it in a matter of a week and we can take it on quickly. So that's first and foremost huge. And if you have a really busy calendar management can release anywhere from like 3 to 5 hours a week, give or take. We also provide a lot of solutions for wider leadership teams. So not just like one individual executive, we might be servicing 3 to 8 different leaders within an organization. And where there's a lot of value with that, especially as it relates to calendar, is if you have, call it 2 admins and they're connected and managing 6 people's calendars, they're the ones that are talking back and forth of, oh, I can move this over here to this time to accommodate this urgent meeting. And there's a lot of like synergy that can happen. And so it allows then the entire leadership team to level up and not being like bogged down with that type of work. So that's one thing I would say I always suggest to just take off your plate. From there, inbox management's another one. Some people are a little funny about inbox management, but I think that that can be extremely helpful, especially if you're receiving hundreds of emails a day. It's not even about responding on them. It's about flagging the urgent ones, deleting the spam, just the little things that take up a little bit of time. And the one thing I always suggest to people is, because I hear a lot of, well, that only takes me a minute or two here and there. Well, when you start to think about it and kind of what you were saying about tracking time to really figure out what that looks like, 1 to 2 minutes really can add up over the course of a day. And so if you can release that type of work, think about all the other work and client support and new business that you can take in by just allowing somebody else to take on this couple of minutes.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, then I want to encourage you to check out the Agency Profitability Toolkit. It's a free set of resources that we've put together to help agency owners just like you improve their profitability. It's full of free checklists, templates, and training videos, and has helped thousands of agencies get better at measuring the essentials of their business. So if you want to grab a free copy of that, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit or look for a link wherever you're watching or listening to this. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll let you get back to the episode. So I want to speak to my personal experience with this because I think it's very relevant to exactly what you just shared. Calendar and inbox management were at the top of the list, and then there was some bookkeeping stuff, and then there was actually just like some sales operation stuff that we were able to tack on, like all kinds of other little things that were super helpful. But the way that this kind of played out for me was I got to a place where I was like, I have to do something about this when we started getting very busy with sales calls, and we were also busy with client work. And at the time, I was still very much involved in both. And so my days would start, I'd have a little bit of time in the morning to actually like do tasks. And then my Zoom marathon would start around 10, 11 a.m. and it wouldn't end until about 6. And there was not any room really in between those calls for anything other than using the washroom, trying to, not put myself in a position where I had to hit my macros in 2 hours at the end of the day, which still ended up happening, which was horrible. It's really sucks eating that much before bed. And the problem is I would get to the end of my, Zoom marathon, it's 6 p.m. and all of these tasks that take a minute or two would stack up throughout the day. So then I would be at my desk from 6 till 8, 9, 10 p.m. doing all of these 10-minute tasks, like the 30 of them, like follow up on this sales call, add notes to this thing in the CRM, schedule a thing to follow up with this person in 3 weeks, send the sales deck to this person, respond to this email. And that's when I really realized, because I was forced to do them in one go, how much time I was spending on all these little things. And when I was able to hire an assistant to buy back all that stuff, it got done faster. Fewer things would slip through the cracks, and I got my evenings back, which when like the difference between ending work at 7 p.m. and I go to bed at 9 because I get up at 5. So like if I was finishing work at 9 and going straight to bed, that sucks. I have no life, right? But if I finish work at 8, I now have an hour. If I finish work at 7, I have 2 hours. Like the impact was so exponential. And so I think I was in this position where like I just felt it, and it was like a perfect storm. And prior to hiring the assistant, I was forced to design my calendar. And so transitioning calendar, man, like we already had rules and stuff set up for that, which are things that generally you want to work through when you hire an assistant. But that was, I think I was well positioned to immediately realize the value, because it was like, oh shit, yeah, I really do spend 2-3 hours a day on this stuff. I just never realized it before because I could sprinkle it throughout the day. And when I couldn't do it anymore, I was like, wow, this is substantial.
Yeah, absolutely. It can really, especially when you are, ends where you're like spending your entire evening, and it's things that you can't not do. you know. I One thing I would say too, anytime you can create an operational process or a workflow for something, that is something that should be handed off. If it can be documented and it can be, after this type of call, this document should be sent to them, and this email, then follow up with them 3 days later. Anything that can be standardized and operationalized like that, I always say just hand it off, and maybe it takes a month until somebody, really builds trust and you feel comfortable doing that. But that to me is a no-brainer.
Absolutely. And then for all the stuff that's kind of nuanced, I use an app called Voxer on my phone, voice notes, voice memos, all kinds of different things. But it's as easy as just saying, hey, this was a bit of a weird call. The person asked for this thing. Can you do that? And yeah, it's just incredible. It is really incredible. It's life-changing. It's like the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. Once you know what it's like to have an assistant, you never go back. So you could tell I'm a big advocate for this concept. Now I want to get to the next part, which is, I know there's lots of other people, because thankfully there are a lot of people talking about this and trying to encourage entrepreneurs to buy back their time, but doing it is hard and scary for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about. What are some of the mistakes that you see people make when they try to do this for the first time on their own?
I think the biggest mistake that I see is people thinking that, and while I think that many admins in my team at the top of the list are unicorns, people not committing the appropriate amount of time and resources in the beginning to get the assistant or admin set up on the right foot. A lot of times I've seen, and this is where, we haven't had many failed client relationships in my tenure within my organization, but every time we have a client that doesn't stick around, as long as we have clients right now that have been with us for almost 3 years. And when we have clients that kind of move on faster than we would intend, we always reflect and say, what was it that we might have not done correctly, and how can we improve it in the future? We've really done a lot from our side to improve, but then we also, on the flip side, say, can't all just be us. What are the things that maybe we would train a new client to do on their side? And I would say time and time again, it's that they don't commit the time. And that is the biggest thing. It's like you have to go into it as like a partnership if you want to see the like positive end result. And if you're not willing to do that, you're likely not going to get as much bang for your buck as you can, unless you're willing to be truly a partner.
Yeah, this has certainly been my experience, and it's not actually a very large volume of time in my experience. It's 15, 30-minute check-ins every day for the first little while. And that's, I think, the space where we started filling on all the little gaps of like, here's 3 emails that I'm not sure how to respond to. And then we would write the response together. And then all of the nuances, like 80% of it is you can do and process. The other 20%, it's that kind of stuff. That was my experience for sure. And I could certainly attest to that. What are some of the other mistakes that you see them make in terms of like how they try to source this person? What kind of qualifications they're looking for, compensation, expectations, any other things to watch out for if somebody's going to go try to do this for the first time?
Yeah. I would say if you're looking for somebody that's truly kind of more of like a doer, um, that's good and all, but you have to make sure you're compensating people appropriately. And so I would say you kind of pay what you get for. So a lot of times, I remember I was talking to somebody I'd met a long time ago, and she was saying to me, well, my admin, she doesn't act like you do. And I'm like, well, how much are you paying her? She's like, well, $14 an hour. And I said, well, hold up. You you can't expect somebody that would be getting paid like 40, $50 an hour and operating at 14. And so I think that that's one thing. It's like there's a misconception that admins can truly drive a business and drive profitability, but it's about like finding the right person. So I think that that's one thing. It's making sure that you're finding somebody that you're willing to pay. That's first and foremost. I think that goes for any role though, right? And you're kind of any role within an organization. Second of all, I would say making sure you're doing a really healthy vetting process, and asking the right questions. I have definitely had some situations in the past where we have thought we had fully vetted people, and they kind of, I always use the term, bamboozled us. And so one thing I would say is if you can't afford to hire an agency like ours, it is really healthy because we do such a strong vetting process. We have multiple people doing vetting. We also have really significant training, not only on like the team member side, but also the client side. So if you can work with an agency like ours, I highly suggest it just because we do all that for you.
Yeah.
And so that's just my 2 cents. But I would say making sure that you're really fully vetting somebody and not just going off of their resume.
I completely agree. And to kind of support what you're saying, like just so everyone has the context, I source an assistant directly, but what we had to do in order to get good outputs from that process, first of all, we went to Upwork, which when you post an admin assistant job on Upwork, the floodgates are going to open. We got hundreds of applicants for this job because everybody on Upwork can do an executive assistant job, or at least that's what they'll tell you. And one of the really, really important things that we did is we created a test project to filter out the applicants. But it took time to design that test project, review those test projects, and vet the people. And one of the other things that we did, although I think this is a really, really key trick for any kind of, if you're trying to source somebody on a platform like that, the last line of the job post was, if you're interested in this role, submit a 1-minute video on your cover letter explaining why you want to do it. Because I knew that I'm not a detail-oriented person. My assistant had to be. And so I needed somebody who read every last line of the job posting and actually followed the instructions to a T. And so that was helpful because it took the hundreds of applicants and filtered that list down significantly. But there was a fairly big lift in the vetting process afterwards. And if you're in a position where you don't have any additional time, like I was lucky that my fiance is a consultant, and so I could just like hire her to design the test project, and I was able to like throw a little bit of money at the problem. Otherwise, I probably would not have had the time or energy to properly go through that process, and I don't think I would have gotten a good outcome the way that I did. So to your point, in the short term, like just find somebody who knows what they're doing to take the pressure off, but make sure you do a proper vetting process, because this is a critically important role and that person's going to be communicating on your behalf. And yeah, that was certainly the experience for me. The vetting process was critically important.
I would say too, I've used a couple of softwares. There are a couple of softwares that will do assessments for you. And they have general administrative executive assistant assessments, which I have found a lot of value in those. But even taking just general questions of work that you'd be having somebody do, and to your point, adding that into the interview application is definitely great. I did that in the beginning where I had, hey, if you were choosing a time zone for this person, this person, this person, what time zone would you choose? And see if they were able to like truly think through from an executive assistant's perspective of, oh, I would choose this one because it's the most mutually beneficial for all three people. And so I asked a lot of those questions in the vetting process. And to your point, you can easily get submissions where people don't even answer the questions. And you're like, oh, right, well, those people are immediately out the door and kind of moving on to the next. So it definitely goes back to that detail oriented, making sure that you're finding someone like that. So that helps. Yes.
I love it. So for those that are listening that maybe have drank enough of our Kool-Aid here to say, hey, maybe I should start thinking about buying back some of that time so that I can do more client work, earn more money for the business, sell more stuff, or maybe just, I don't know, have a life outside of work, which, ebbs and flows as entrepreneurs. It happens to the best of us. What final advice do you have for them?
I would say time is your most valuable asset, and it's something that you're never going to get back. And so really evaluating what that looks like for you and is so, so important. To your point, getting back time with friends, family, or just your business. And but from there, I would say find an executive assistant that can truly not only benefit you, but benefit your business, and make sure that it's the right fit with culturally as well as personality. I think fits are always, always key.
I love it. So with all of that, Amanda, if people want to follow you and what you're doing and consume more of the content that you're creating, where should they go and find you on the internet?
Yeah. So it's Hamilton Raye, that's RAYE.com. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.
All right. So we will have links to all of that in the show notes for those of you that are listening that want to check out what Amanda's doing at Hamilton Raye. And with that, Amanda, thank you so much for making the time for us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.